Hey everyone, this is Ashley Jones, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you some tips to edit your text built into your Dime software. So I am using features from our Perfect Embroidery Pro software program, and some of the fonts I will be highlighting are from Word Art and Stitches. I am defaulted to my embroidery tool shed. So in the lower right, you can see here that I have embroidery tool shed the default. I know that because it is highlighted in blue. Also, when I click this options button, it doesn't give me the option for default. So I know that this is in the default, and I have Perfect Embroidery Pro and Word Art and Stitches have a check mark. So I am using features from those. You can see that I have all of my software installed and active, but the features I'm using you can do with Perfect Embroidery Pro, but some of the text are coming from Word Art and Stitches. Just want to be clear about what I'm using. So let's start by selecting our text tool up here in the upper left. I click on my text icon and I click one time on the screen and it puts my first letter. I'm going to move this over here close to my properties area. So a question that I received just recently was how to thicken your text. Now, satin stitch, if you make it larger, it's going to thicken as it increases in size. So for instance, if we make this a 2-inch letter, I'm going to click apply. That is going to be thicker than it was as a 3/4 of an inch text. If you want to maintain the size and you still want to thicken the satin stitch, one way to do that is to change your push-pull compensation, and it's really the pull compensation. So I'm going to go back to a 1-inch letter just to make this a better size for what we're doing. And then up here in my properties, you can see my cursor blinking. I'm going to click on the pull push tab and I'm going to adjust the pull compensation. Mine is set to percentage. You can change yours to whatever you like. So I'm going to put in 150 so we can see a visible difference. So when I click apply, watch the letter on the screen. It's going to thicken the satin stitch because what pull compensation does is it actually compensates for our thread pulling on our fabric when we're stitching. So if you need to make a letter bolder without increasing the size, this is kind of a tricky way to do that without having to digitize a letter that you need a certain width for the satin stitch. So that's one way to do it. With a satin stitch. So if I go back to just a 100% and click apply again, you'll see that it goes back to the normal width of my satin stitch. Now, the other part of this question was that somebody wanted a letter that was similar to applique, so thick and chunky, but didn't want to put fabric in there. So here's something that I would do for that situation. So I'm going to just open a new page here. And then I'm going to choose a text and add that to my screen. Remember, click the text tool, click one time on your workspace. It will drop the letter A, and then here in the text properties, you can change that to whatever you want it to be. Now, one thing you can do is choose a built-in font that looks like an applique, but it's actually all fill and satin stitches. So this font here is a good option. So this is a font that is in Word Art and Stitches. So remember I said I'm using features from Perfect Embroidery Pro, but I'm using text from Word Art and Stitches. So this font is only a part of our Word Art and Stitches software. If you don't own Word Art and Stitches, you won't have this font. But notice how it's a fill stitch in the inside and a satin stitch on the outside. And you certainly could make this 2 different colors as it is displayed, but you could make it all one color if you wanted. These texts are all resizable. to whatever size you want. And if you're typing out an entire word, of course, you can do that in this text as well. So now here's a really good point. I typed a capital H and a lowercase I. If I hover over the AB here, I can see that this is only available in uppercase letters. So that's why my I didn't show up. So if I hit the capital I, that will add that to the screen. So that's one option for a beefy text that looks similar to applique, but it's actually all stitches. Another option is to create your own text. You can use the built-in applique text to convert, or you can import a true type text. So let's do both ways. So I'm going to choose a text again, and then just double click my zoom tool here. That will put it in the center of my screen, and I'm just turning it on 3D so it's more visible. Now this is an all stitch text, so it's fill and satin. If I scroll down to the bottom of my list here, I have some applique text. Now remember, I'm using fonts from our Word Art and Stitches and Perfect Embroidery Pro. These applique fonts are actually inside of Word Art and Stitches. So if you don't have Word Art and Stitches, then these applique fonts will not show up in your list. Okay, so if I go to my sequence view down here in the lower right where my cursor's blinking, I can see that I have this one letter on the screen. If I open up the plus sign, I see that it's text. So when it lists it as text, that means I can just easily change this. If I want to change it to a B instead of an A, I can go and it makes the changes, and then I can easily adjust the properties that are specific to my text. Once I do what I'm about to do, you can't make those same edits. So be certain that you have your text like you want it before you do this next step. So now once I click on the text here, I'm going to do a right mouse click and choose break up text. When I break up my text, this now to the computer software is just an applique design. It's no longer text, which means notice up here in the top, I do not have the option for my text properties. But to do what I'm about to do, I had to break it up. Okay, so now the next thing that I want to do is for this applique, I actually want to see the placement and the tack down separately. So I'm going to select the applique, do a right mouse click, and then do my break up path. And it separates out my placement stitch and my tack down and the finishing stitch, which is still listed as an applique. But I open this up here and you can see it's just a run stitch. Now if I take that run stitch, if I wanted to fill this applique in with stitches, I could take this run stitch alone and convert it to a fill stitch. So this is grouped together, these three different stitches. So I'm going to right mouse click again and ungroup them. You could also use the group and ungroup option on your toolbar up here at the top. Okay, so now it's ungrouped. I can select only the run stitch by itself, which is I've done here in the sequence view. And you can see if I hide these with the eyeball that I've got a run stitch, a placement stitch, and that finishing stitch. Okay, so what we're going to do, let's just go ahead and hide those. I'm just selecting the run stitch. Okay, I have two ways to convert this to a fill stitch. I can do a right mouse click and choose convert to complex fill. That's one option. Or down here in the bottom, the lower right of my screen, you can see this little star tab. That's my effects panel. And if I do that, make sure the run stitch part is selected, I can actually click on the type of stitches I want to make this. So if I want it to be a fill stitch, I can click to select fill stitch, and it will fill that run stitch for me. So if I head back over here to my sequence view in the bottom right here, I'm making my cursor blink, turn back on my other stitches, and really you don't even need that placement stitch there anymore, but you do want that satin stitch around the edge. So now I've created an applique font that's built into the program, and I've turned it into a fill stitch instead of the applique. Now you might want to change the outside as a different color, so if I just select the applique, do a right mouse click on a color below, I can convert that to the text that I want. So that's another option for filling in an applique design, or in this case, a text. Now, let's see one more option. Now, these options that I'm showing you are not everything that's out there. I can think of other ways to do it as well. So, just, get creative with the features in your software is really what I normally do to make happen what I need to happen. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to go to File and say import true type text. So true type text are the font options that live on your computer. They're used by Word, Adobe products, maybe some of your other software programs, and we can read them in our software as well. So I'm going to type my text here where it says text. Notice in this case I typed a lowercase I, and I'm going to click the options button here, and I'm going to choose a font. For what I'm about to do, I recommend a bold type font. Don't use one with that's just a narrow font. So this Cooper font that I keep passing right here, it works great for what we're about to do. So I'm going to choose Cooper. I'm going to say OK, and then I'm going to click OK, and it'll add that artwork onto my screen. Now, if I click over here in my sequence view, so you can see I'm my cursor blinking in the bottom lower right area. If I push the plus here next to my artwork, I have two different artwork designs. These are not text. The software does not see them as text. I do not have properties for the text option here either. So if I click on one of them, I have the ability to convert those to any type of stitches that I want. Remember, we have two ways to change into different stitch types. I can do a right mouse click, choose convert to, and I can convert to any of these stitch types. So we want to have a complex fill with a satin outside. So what I would actually do is I would convert to a complex fill first. Okay, and I'm going to turn on my 3D so it just looks brighter on the screen. Okay, and then what I do, notice over here in my sequence view, it now says complex fill because this is stitches. If I copy and paste this, so I've got just the H selected, I'm going to use my copy up here in the top. See my cursor blinking? Hit copy one time. Next to it, hit paste one time. And now I have two complex fills on top of one another. But the second one that is still selected, I'm going to convert that to a column stitch, which we call a still stitch. So I can convert two different ways. I can right mouse click and convert to a still stitch, and it'll put the outline around the edge. Now, it's the same color, so if you wanted a different color, just choose that color below, and then your embroidery machine will stop and allow you to change colors. Now, let's do the same thing with the eye, but I'm going to use the effects panel in the bottom or the lower right area where my cursor's blinking instead of the right mouse click. So let's start by selecting the eye, and I've got that selected by itself. I'm going to choose my effects panel here. And remember, the first one you want to be a complex fill. If you do a still first, you can just change the order. So actually, let's do it backwards. That's a good learning. So I'm going to choose still, and it will convert that to a still stitch. Okay. Perfect. Now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to copy it and paste it. It is still selected. I can see the box around it. So I'm going to choose up here on the top my copy. Just click one time on the paste, and it just pastes one right on top of it. If I go back here to my sequence view, blinking in the bottom right, I can see steel and steel. That's two on top of one another. In fact, let's change the color so that we can see what's happening. And actually, maybe a yellow against that blue would show better. Okay, so I have one in blue, I have one in yellow. So the second one, I'm going to do the same thing. Let's go to our effects panel, and instead of the steel stitch, I'm going to just click on fill, and it converts that to a fill stitch. Now, notice the order. If I watch my slow redraw, the H is going to do the fill first, and then that satin finish, the steel that we call it. The second one is going to do the satin first, the steel stitch, and then the finishing stitch, or the last stitch, is the fill stitch. That's the incorrect order. So the easiest way to fix that is to, well, there's actually several ways. So let's talk about that. So I can click and drag my yellow fill above the satin and it puts it in the right order. Or I could have chosen, let's do an undo and do something else. Undo. Another way to do it, but it's actually going to put it out of order. So this is why I didn't choose this first. So if I choose the yellow and click the send to back or move to back, it's actually going to put it first. Well, now that is stitched in the correct order, but it's going to stitch my both of my letters kind of out of an order that I don't want. So it's going to first do the fill because we sent it all the way back to the first, then it's going to do the H, and then it's going to come back and do both of those finishing stitches around the edge. So when I know I want it in an order, and you as the user are smarter than the computer, you can simply drag it to that order. So if I drop it right under this H steel, it's going to put it in the order that I would like it to stitch. So I can stitch the H and then stitch the I. So that's a few different ways to edit your text. Hopefully this will help you with your text editing.